Aloha and welcome back. So we're going to take on the Kavernacle right now. The Kavernacle is a left wing. I'm pretty sure he calls himself a communist, and I'm pretty sure he's from the UK. He's going to talk about the U.S. empire is finally ending. Elon Musk and Donald Trump killed it. So this is an actual left winger on the world perspective. You know how we look at Dem and Dem, Majority Report. Um, they like to call themselves progressives, and they're really center right liberals, which are not progressives or not left wing. So this is going to show you what a true left winger is, as opposed to the liberals in America calling themselves left wing. So like a few other left wingers, like Sabby Sabs in America, she's left. Breonna Joy Gray. You got Revolutionary Blackout, Nico House. So we've gone over some of those. Hardlands Media. So those are like actual left wing YouTube channels or whatnot. So if you want to check any of those out, some of those I've gone over. Those will show you left as compared to where um, Kyle Kalinske, he's going to be more of a liberal, a Democrat sycophant, more center right than left. So we'll look at a real left winger now, the Kavernacle.
So Elon Musk responded to this on Twitter the other day. It's time to leave NATO and the UN. He responded, I agree. And it was at that moment, upon seeing that on Blue Sky, I realized it's over. Like, the US is over as the global hegemonic empire. And that's because someone like Elon Musk, who's clearly like driving a lot of policy these days, not just with Doge, just generally, him saying this is really significant. And we're seeing it kind of play out in Ukraine, like all the European, I guess, what they felt were assurances from the US that they would protect them, that's kind of like disintegrating. And I want to talk about this today because it's an interesting one, because obviously, if you guys have been following my channel for a long time, and I hope most people watching this will be like subscribers, because I know I'll probably get some backlash for my comments on this
And like, share, subscribe here too.
video. But, you know, I've said consistently the US is the most evil country in the world. I've thought that throughout the entire time I've had this YouTube channel.
And I would think a lot of people throughout the world think the U.S. is the most evil country in the world. We attack a lot of people, do a lot of coups, do a lot of wars, do a lot of secret wars, do a lot of proxy wars. So I could see that coming from somebody not from the U.S.
And it's for a variety of reasons. People often come into my mentions saying, what about Iran? What about North Korea? What about, you know, China?
So like those countries, even if they do bad stuff to their own people, we do bad stuff to our people. We have a lot of homeless people. We have a lot of people in jail. Most of our people are living paycheck to paycheck, so you're living kind of scared. You're living in a state of uncomfort, right? You're not comfortable because you know that if you get sick or hurt your knee, break a leg, something like that, and you miss a couple paychecks, you might be homeless. And so we do it domestically too, but nobody does it worldwide like we do. Nobody not outsources, but you know what? I can't think of the word, but delivers destruction to other countries like we do.
That one makes me laugh the most.
Exports.
And
Nobody exports destruction like we do.
it's just like, I don't think Americans, because of the soft power of America and just the image of America, they really appreciate how evil the American nation state is and its impact on the world is, and how a lot of people around the world don't like America. Like, we like American pop culture, we like American, like, music, film, TV, video games. We don't like the American foreign policy establishment. That includes
And a lot of Americans don't like the American foreign policy, but the American, and this is over long term. So this includes Democrats and Republicans. Joe Biden was hard up for the Gulf War. I think both of them. I know the last Iraq War he was all into, but Democrats, Republicans alike, they love war. It's not like the world sees us as evil. We need to change that, and change that. We need to change parties. You know what I'm saying?
countries that are so-called protected by the US, like South Korea and Japan, who also often don't like the US presence in their own countries. In terms of like me thinking it's the most evil country in the world, that's not to say America is the most evil domestically, although I think Americans significantly downplay that it is one of the worst for this as well. It's more about like it domestically combined with its role in upholding.
So our education system has been pretty bad, and like we went over a couple days ago, we don't get the Chinese electric cars, and they're the best cars around the world right now. So we don't get all the stuff that we could be able to get if we, traded and were fair with people. So there's a lot of things that we don't get domestically that we could have more of or better of.
Holding like this terrible status quo around the world, and how we live in an economic system that was designed by the United States in 1944 when they created the IMF and the World Bank, and of course their general fight against the spread of socialism and communism in the Cold War period, and then of course in the 1990s where they were just at the height of their power, spreading this version of neoliberalism around the world, something that of course exploits the poorest countries for the benefit of the wealthiest ones. But at the end of the day, we all suffer.
In the 1990s, that was Bill Clinton.
Under this system, and the US falling back is good for everyone, in my opinion. But I will show sympathy, and unlike a lot of people who commented in my video where I was saying that, not all Trump supporters knew what they were voting for, I'm not going to blame you Americans who constantly vote for empire. I'm not happy that you're now...
Well, almost all Americans vote for Democrats or Republicans, so they all vote for empire. If you vote Green or Libertarian Party or DSA or some other parties, then yeah, a few of us don't vote for empire, but most of the time, most Americans vote for empire.
Now being punished by the Trump administration. I'm not happy, and I'm not going to say, oh, well, if you didn't want this, you should have...
And so, like he said, we were at the height of our powers in the 90s, right? And what did he just say of the Trump?
I'm not going to blame you Americans who constantly vote for empire. I'm not happy that you're now being punished by the Trump administration.
Punished by the Trump administration. So in the 1990s, we were punished by the Clinton administration when they ran the crime bill and punished black people for doing stuff Joe Biden's son does. So, we get punished by either one. The Democrats, so that's some domestic stuff right there, right? But Trump, he's bad, but Democrats are just as bad. I don't, so...
I'm not happy, and I'm not going to say, oh, well, if you didn't want this, you should have voted for left-wing parties. Like, you should have made a third party.
Well, no, yeah. There you go. You should have made a third party. We should vote for left-wing parties. We should vote for third parties. We should vote for non-empire. We should vote for good. I'm going to let him go a little bit.
Vote for empire. I'm not happy that you're now being punished by the Trump administration. I'm not happy, and I'm not going to say, oh, well, if you didn't want this, you should have voted for left-wing parties. Like, you should have made a third party that won. I'm not going to say stuff like that, because the bad part about all of this is while I like the US retreating from the global stage, I don't like what they're doing, obviously, domestically, because they're destroying the country. And the comparison I'm going to make, not because I think Donald Trump is a Russian asset or, like, in league with Russian spies, like a lot of liberals, they're turning America into post-Soviet Russia. And what this means is it's like a speed run of deregulation and looting by the 1%. And that is what happened in post-Soviet Russia, where the country was so much worse off after the fall of the Soviet Union because the IMF came in and in exchange for all these loans made them implement this free market capitalist system which destroyed Russia and also allowed this oligarchy to form that still is in power today. And that is what we're seeing with the United States, I believe, as well. We're seeing a small oligarchy loyal to Trump.
And so if you take what he said, right, they broke up the old Soviet Union and the 1% deregulated, took all the power, all the money, whatever. And now we've had Putin, or they've had Putin in power for the last 20, maybe 30 years, right? He talked about the oligarchy. So we had the the Cold War with Russia, right? And so we won the Cold War, which I think we did a video that somebody was talking about that earlier. But we won the Cold War and broke up the USSR or Russia, whatever, and now, or they broke up the USSR and now there's Russia and all the other little countries. And Putin and these oligarchs are there. We did that. Like, we caused that. I don't know if we necessarily put in their oligarchs, but if we're going around breaking up these left-wing communist socialist countries trying to make them capitalist is oligarchy, is the 1% controlling everything. And if we don't like their 1%, we call them bad oligarchs. But if we dig their 1%, like Saudi Arabia, we call them allies. And Israel, allies. They're just as crazy as Russia, Saudi Arabia. Don't they say they throw gay people off of buildings, but they're our ally?
In power and looting the country, and there is no plan for the future. And also what we're seeing with the foreign policy, like I said, as much as I like the US retreating, it's not really driven purely by some sort of libertarian ideology. It's more driven by Trump and his cronies' pursuit of profit and how to cut costs so they can make more money. Like, all this cost cutting you're seeing with Doge and what they're doing with, you know, US aid and stuff, that's not to then take it home and implement universal healthcare, is it? It's nothing rational. It's they want to cut everything so Elon Musk can get more handouts from the government.
Wouldn't that be nice if they did say they were cutting for universal health care or something like that, something for the people? They talked about the $5,000 checks for like 10 minutes, and I haven't heard about that in a few days. And, you know, I'll be trying to be up on the news, and I only heard them talk about the $5,000 checks once.
But like, he can get like more SpaceX contracts and stuff like that, and the United States government can be looted by these people, and there's more money for them to take. Not that they're all like, we should focus on making our country better first, and then we'll help out everyone else. I want to talk about all of this today, especially in regard to the Ukraine stuff. But yeah, as a left-wing person who is anti-NATO, anti-US, anti-capitalist, the US having less of an influence on the world is, I think, undisputably a good thing. And the US leaving NATO is a good thing as well. And I've said this in previous videos, that if NATO is to be a purely defensive alliance in Europe, the US needs to leave. And I'd say Turkey as well. And as much as I still don't want NATO to exist, them leaving makes its existence seem to make more sense, because it is focused primarily on Europe and not them having to commit mercenary forces for US foreign policy goals in exchange for US funding. So all of that coming up for you today. Please like the video, follow me on social media at the Kavernacle on Instagram, also at the Gamernacle on Instagram, where I'm just posting about my recent games I'm playing, and also check me out on Patreon and YouTube memberships if you want to support the channel. So I
don't have all that, just like, share, and subscribe.
NATO thing, and just elaborate a bit more, because Fox News ran an article just like outlining all the Republicans who are talking about this. So momentum is building among some Republicans and Elon Musk to withdraw the US from NATO amid stalled negotiations to end the war in Ukraine. Trump reportedly floated pulling the US from the alliance during his first term, we all remember that. Senator Mike Lee has publicly backed such efforts in recent weeks and said it's time to leave the alliance after NATO countries held an emergency meeting with Ukraine in London. Lee said on Twitter that if NATO is moving on without the US should move on from NATO. What should we call the movement to get America out of NATO? America exit. Lee said on the post, it's a good thing that our NATO allies give us such favourable trade terms based on the fact that we provide a disproportionate share of their security needs. Oh wait, they don't. Lee isn't the only lawmaker. Thomas Massie also said that NATO is a Cold War relic. So the political push here, it could be driven by ideology, right? Because like Thomas Massie is this libertarian, so they don't like overseas foreign spending anyway. But I will say the Elon Musk thing is interesting. He also posted something else on Twitter, which is so funny. He writes this on Twitter. The EU leaders and Zelensky are having fancy dinners while men die in trenches. How many parents will never see their son again? How many children will never see their father? Elon, you could ask that about yourself. How many of your children will never see their father and you're not fighting in a trench? So yeah, obviously.
But Elon Musk, he's having fancy dinners all day, every day, or fancy meals all day, every day, right? While people die in the trenches and stuff. Like, he could end lots of wars just with his money. So stupid. Why is he gonna talk about somebody else doing the same thing that he's doing?
All of this coincides with the recent
he got more money than Zelensky
with Zelensky and Ukraine, and we saw that spectacle in the White House. But yeah, what we're seeing with these people is a drive to pull away from NATO. Like I said, with people like Elon Musk, I think because he is the biggest contractor with the Defense Department, I seriously think it's all about pulling funds away from stuff they don't personally think they benefit from to stuff that they will personally benefit from. When Elon Musk says this, I don't think it's driven by ideology. I think it's driven by his pursuit of more power and more profit. With the others, we are seeing a lot of people kind of want to return.
It turns a two-story into a ranch concept.
To this, they call it isolationist foreign policy of the United States between 1918 or 1920, whenever they left the League of Nations, and the Second World War. And if you know your history, you know the US has never been an isolationist nation. It's always been an expansionist imperial power, including in this period. But what you saw with this period is them focus more on their sphere of influence. So they didn't really care about Europe in this time. They focused more on South America, the Caribbean, and
The Monroe Doctrine.
Asia. And that's what eventually brought them in to dispute with Japan, of course, not because they had a clash and they also hated fascism. It was you had two imperial powers clashing over territory in the Pacific region. Then during the Second World War, add France and Britain to that as well. And I guess that's like what we're kind of reverting back to is the US, in some regards, if it goes through this, is reverting back to its 1930 status where it's more concerned with its sphere of influence. And this does include Asia. Like, I haven't seen too much talk about the United States significantly pulling out of Korea, Japan, and getting rid of its commitments to Taiwan. I haven't seen much talk around that. So it feels like that sort of reversion of they want to focus on stuff that's closer to their borders, closer to their like direct sphere of influence, where for them, Europe isn't the direct sphere of influence because although they back these countries, they obviously have all these bases around Europe. At the end of the day, these are different nation states that kind of have autonomy from the United States, and the United States doesn't drive their policy, and they're not always reliable partners in terms of United States foreign policy goals. And they often find that more in Asia, where like South Korea is a great partner of US imperialism, probably one of the best they've had. Japan does act as this as well, and if they're trying to contain the new superpower of China, it makes sense to focus their efforts more in Asia and withdraw from Europe. Because especially after the Ukraine war, Russia is a superpower primarily for its military, which has been decimated during this conflict, and although it has good combat experience, I don't think poses a significant threat to US foreign policy goals anymore. And that's how you can read it if we're going to talk about like more like realist international relations theory interpretations of what's going on right now. But in terms of like the Zelensky stuff as well, I just want to comment on that. I think both parties knew what they were doing. I don't think Zelensky couldn't contain himself, and Donald Trump finally irritated him enough to explode right at the White House. I think the political gamble he made was, I'm going to do this and expose how much I don't have commitment from the United States government, so I get Europe to back me more. And what happened afterwards is he was tweeting or retweeting all these European leaders saying they stand with Ukraine and will give Ukraine anything it needs. Now, it does appear that it hasn't really worked.
I mean, that's a slick try, you know, it's a something.
It's like this gamble, and even though he's got European support, a lot of the European leaders were saying, like, you have to make it right with Donald, and I did see that Ukraine are going to sign this mineral deal, but I think that just exposes to a lot of people the face of American imperialism, right? So
you got to give us the resources. If it ain't oil, it's rare earth, something.
Now what we're seeing with Ukraine, that the US want the minerals, and Russia want the minerals, and they're just fighting over resources, essentially, in this proxy war.
Right.
Now, people sometimes get funny when you say proxy war. Proxy war doesn't mean Ukraine are fighting on the behalf of America, right? Like, the only reason they're doing this war is the fight for America. They're not. They're fighting a self-defensive war against the Russian government. What it does mean is the US backing of Ukraine isn't for freedom, isn't for human rights, and it's never been the case. Doesn't matter if it was Joe Biden, and doesn't matter what president they have been armed under. The United States doesn't give a shit about Ukrainian independence. They give a shit about general foreign policy goals of containing Russian influence in Europe. And now it seems like the better deal is Russia doesn't really pose a threat to them, Americans, anymore. Let's carve up Ukraine's resources between each other. And sometimes what I appreciate about Donald Trump, as someone who hates America, is he just says the quiet part out loud. Like, no one can ignore it when he just says it. Like, you know, we're just going to do this. I want Ukraine's minerals, and they're going to repay us for all the aid we've given. And I like it because then everyone can see, oh yeah, America are the bad guys. And anti-American sentiment in Europe has just gotten so insane. And you wish it would be over stuff like, you know, arming Israel and everything they did in Gaza, rather than just like being honest for once. But at the same time, I can take either. Like, I'm happy people hate America more than they used to. It is funny though, like, I'm seeing lots of posts from Americans.
And see, that's because the Democrat and Republican Party, like he said, it was the same under Joe Biden, right? We need to change the way we act. We need to change what we're doing as a entire society here in America and the West in general, but especially in America.
Apologizing, like they're saying, I am so sorry, like these maniacs are controlling our government. And I'm just thinking, it doesn't matter if it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden, you're always evil. Like, the United States nation
Right.
state is always evil. Like I said,
But the Green Party is non-violent, non-interventionist. It's a party of peace. We would stop every war. But this is why I'm so adamant about leaving the Democratic Party, is because if you look at it from a worldview, Democrats and Republicans are pretty much the exact same. We need to change. We need to be better.
Donald Trump just puts a different flavour on it. But also, if you've been following my coverage of the Ukraine stuff, I said Joe Biden or Harris, they would have pushed Zelensky to have a deal this year as well. I don't think that has actually changed. But the isolationist flavour of this, the anti-NATO stuff, that is what's different. And there's something else I just want to add to the conversation. So we've got the anti-NATO stuff, but then also we have just written down like a little list of everything they've been pulling out.
So basically, Kamala or Joe Biden would have stayed in NATO, stayed in the UN, and keep their paws in the world, keep trying to make the U.S. the hegemonic power of the world. Where now you got China and Russia and the BRIC stuff. It's about to be a multipolar world if it's not already. Multipolar meaning multi-powered, I think is what it is, or polar like the poles. But multiple powers in the world. China, Russia, South America, just a bunch of different countries now have power. So we're going from the unipolar world, which was just us, the United States having all the power, telling everybody what to do, to people being more equal, more countries having more say and being more equal. And I think that's a good thing.
From recently, and I just want to speak about like NATO in the broader context. So we have the tariffs.
So what I was saying was that Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, they would keep us in that UN, they would keep us to where we're trying to be the hegemonic power. The Green Party, I don't know about having to stay in the UN or not, or the EU, not the EU, NATO, but again, we're non-violent, right? So we would stop wars. We would change what the UN and NATO are. It would be more like what China's doing. We need to go around the world building stuff rather than blowing stuff up. Make friends, not enemies. We're in one little spot now. The world is very small now. We can all touch each other. At least our countries can, with the weapons they have and the technology we have. We are all really close now. We need to act like it.
On Canada, which apparently are being reviewed right now, but they have obviously done this, talking about taking over Greenland, pulling out from the World Health Organization, wanting better relations with Russia, wanting denuclearization with Russia and China, and obviously drastically cutting funding for US aid. So all of those things are like big changes in US foreign policy. And like I've been saying, I think most of them are for the better. So the bad part is there's lots of countries that rely on the US for other things. So like US aid, for example, right, does a lot of like good work along with all the stuff to do with like, CIA influence. But there's lots of people who rely on these programs, and Donald Trump cutting that as like an arm of US soft power.
Right, we always got to slip a little bad in when we do good.
I wouldn't say might be bad in the long run, like if we're thinking about like overall, but it is bad. It's going to affect people, it's going to hurt people, it's going to kill people. But we have to, obviously, I think most countries, you have to move past a reliance on the US if you ever want to pursue interests for your own country. And that's why I think the US pulling out of NATO is a good thing, like I was saying. Although I think NATO should have been disbanded after the Cold War, we've seen now that Russia will use like drastic military force on a country like Ukraine. So the idea that there should be some sort of like defensive alliance against like a hostile country like this, primarily focused on the European Union and countries around it, I think makes way more sense than a military alliance to defend Europe where the United States is basically in charge of it and will say to these countries, come help us invade Iraq, come help us occupy Afghanistan, or like, what's going to happen. We're not going to fund your defense. We're not going to come to your defense. You got to do what we say. You got to be mercenaries for US imperialism, or we're not going to protect you. So taking the US out of the picture, I think, and if you would seriously want to think NATO is a defensive alliance, in my opinion, that's a good thing. And if you're talking about the nuclear element, like Britain and France both have nuclear arms and stuff. And obviously we've seen, even with the Ukrainian war, Russia's capability has always been like really, really overhyped. And if it's combating like several different groups with like way better navies, way better air forces than Ukraine, then yeah, like it feels like you don't even need the US, and the US is counterproductive to a defensive aim, if that's what we're going for. So that's a better thing, and that's something I said before. If you want to take it seriously that NATO's defensive and not an expansionist thing at the behest of the US, that's a good thing. I've seen a lot of liberals going mental that Donald Trump wants to scale back America's nuclear stockpile, which is insane. Like, that's objectively a good thing. And
that is objectively a fantastic thing.
Said that he wants to have better relations with China and Russia, and for all of them to reduce their nuclear stockpiles.
Right?
I
It's
like
great.
that. Like, why is anyone mad about that? I saw people in like liberal subreddits going absolutely crazy.
That's a big difference in liberals and the left. The liberals just want to fight, do the little WWE fight because it keeps the people ginned up and keeps the people angry, and so that the Democrats and Republicans can act like they're different. But the left, if Donald Trump does something good, the left will be like, oh, that's good. But just when he does something good. Most of the time he does bad stuff that hurts people, and a lot of times the stuff that he does is kind of good. Like he says, he does it for the wrong reason, right? But even if you do something good for the wrong reason, then sometimes you just got to kind of take it. And then, like he said, you know, getting rid of the US AID that's going to hurt in the short term, but to get away from the US is going to be better for them in the long term. But if the US was more like China and more of a giving country and built infrastructure and built schools and built things that stayed there and didn't, like, don't just give them food, don't give a man a fish, teach a man to fish, right? If we built farms there, built permaculture, built all kinds of different things that stayed there and multiplied and grew, rather than you just got to keep depending on us, right? Because we keep them, U.S. aid keeps them dependent on us. We don't need to keep them dependent on us. We need to make them self-dependent if we're going to do anything with people. If we're not going to make them self-dependent, we just need to leave them alone.
I'm like, do you just want World War III or something? Do you want World War III if the US do it on like the side of the good guys or something? And World War III will be like the last war ever, so it's insane to not like this.
They say World War III will be fought with atomic weapons. World War IV will be fought with sticks.
The final one, of course, which we haven't really spoke about in this video, is the US pulling out of the UN. Now, this is something that is not in the mainstream discourse. You don't really hear many people say this, but then Elon promoting this makes me think it's maybe a conversation that's being had. And I, for one, would also be happy if the US left the UN. What I would like is if the US left, Israel would have significantly less protection in the UN, so would the Saudis, and I think that would be a good thing. But also what would probably happen as well is if the US left the UN, Israel are also going to leave the UN, and they're just going to say nothing applies to them. The same way, because they're both not members of the International Criminal Court, they just say, like, yeah, this don't apply to us. So when Netanyahu goes to the US, where he would be arrested as an ICC member, he goes to the US and he's fine, right? And that's probably what would happen. But to me, isolating the US more and more is a good thing. And if the US, like, in terms of foreign policy, becomes more...
Seeing that sucks. I don't want to be isolated. I want to do good, like, be friends, cooperate, rather than isolation.
Like Russia, then that's just good for the world, I believe. Because the US succeeded in the British Empire as a global hegemon and spreading capitalism even further around the world, and then after the 1990s, becoming the only power, basically. And what that's done to our planet, basically destroyed our planet, how much conflict that's caused, how much proxy wars have been fought, how much wars over minerals, resources, all that stuff, it's because of the US, and we're all playing the US's game. And what would be nice if the US scale back, it's just going to be a more, I guess, equitable relationships between like major countries. Now, what I would like with Donald Trump even saying like he wants better relations with Russia and China,
Equitable, cooperative.
that is a good thing because these are the countries with the big nuclear stockpiles that could plunge us into another world war. So for whatever reason he's doing this, you don't have to like Donald Trump. That's a good thing for the world. You want us to be more peaceful because we have a little thing called climate change where we're all going to suffer. It doesn't matter what border we live in, and we all have to work together, and there has to be steps to reduce tensions between all these countries.
Yeah, like rich people, climate change don't have borders.
So we actually do work together to survive as a human race, and any steps towards that are an actual good thing. However, this is one thing I will say about the US withdrawing itself from the international scene. The one thing I'm worried about here, with them withdrawing to a less proactive role on the world stage, it feels like to me, with the new US-Russia relationship and the Saudi relationship and Russians' relationships with Saudi, Israel, and maybe even like the connection with China, I really hope this doesn't end up in we're just all controlled by one global oligarchy which is all united. Like, that's what would happen instead.
Right.
Like, it's not going to be we're all united as the human race to fight climate change. It's that, no.
Right? So that's why I'm talking about the Green Party so much, right? Because the people of the world, not just the United States, we need to get together. Communism, socialism is a world thought. It's a world process. It's about the people controlling themselves, the government, corporation, whatever. It's about, what is it, control of, I forget the exact term now, but it's about people controlling. The oligarchs, the rich, the corporations, they control the Democrats, they control the Republicans, and they control most parties in most countries. Other countries do have some communist parties, other countries do have some left-wing parties. But Workers of the World Unite is a communist thing. That's not a right-wing thing. That's not a Democratic thing. That's not a Republican thing. These Republicans, these Democrats do not care about people. If we're going to do this world thing, like I said, the corporations are always going to run. They're going to put people in the Democratic Party. They're going to put people in the Republican Party. The Green Party is a people-powered party. We need you. We need your brother, your sister, your mama, your daddy, your kids. Whoever is of age, even if you're not. If you're like 12, 14 and you want to get into politics, what is that? Run in your school stuff, become class president, all that stuff. Get political now as soon as you can. But the people need to band together if we're going to do this, because the oligarchs, it's easy for the 1% that doesn't have borders, that can get on their private jets and they can all talk to each other and see each other. It's easy for them to make a plan and execute it. It's harder for the 80%, the 99%, however far down you want to go, up, whatever. It's harder for the bottom 50% to come together because they ain't got no money. We can't come around. Now we got this internet thing. Now we can come together more, but we need to do it under the right place, under the right umbrella. Because if we do it under the corporate umbrella of the Democratic Party, as Bernie Sanders showed you twice, as Barack Obama showed you twice, it's not going to work.
The oligarchy of each country have now given up their differences. So like the Saudis and the Israelis, for example, was a more recent one, where they're just going to be like, no, we're going to all work together to maximize the extraction of capital. And if we come together and reduce tensions between our nation states, there's going to be no barriers to that. Like, we will just be able to do that. And even you're seeing recently with Donald Trump making this new green card that if it costs like $5 million,
$5 million.
We're just going to have a global oligarchy which is untouchable, and they're all going to be in it together.
But if we stand up as a whole, as a people, we can stop them. And that's not going to be through a corporate Democratic Party.
You saw with Mohammed bin Salman, he said to Antony Blinken he doesn't give a shit about Palestine. That's a massive thing right now that wouldn't allow the oligarchy to join together. That's obviously what you've had with Gulf state oligarchs and the US and Israelis. It's what you've had with Russians right now and the rest of Europe because of the war. You get rid of all of that, you get rid of this tension, and you just get these people to come together, the world might be even more worse off. That's the one thing I'm worried about with the US pulling away and seemingly making more overtures for peace with like China, North Korea, Russia. It feels like it could just be like this general global oligarchy who have all just become besties. I know they are all besties anyway, but when you're taking away like all major conflict differences and everything, I don't know. So yeah, overall, the US empire ending, I'm not as excited as I thought I might be. I thought this day would never come, but we're going to watch it, over the next 4 years.
The right can turn a good thing bad.
It's coming. And like I said, when you're watching the situation in America generally, it's horrific. Like, what they're doing to America is absolutely horrific. And I'm guessing anyone who lived in Russia during the 1990s can probably relate to seeing your country basically be absolutely ransacked by capitalists. And ransacked and looted with no regard for human life. Like, we're seeing all these cuts to social programs. Recently, they're talking about social security as well. And like I said, this happened in post-Soviet Russia. Life expectancy drastically decreased. I think there's like 50% unemployment. Like, the life standards in the 1990s in Russia were far lower than the dying days of the Soviet Union. All those things you're always told about, like bread lines and just how bad it was to live in the Soviet Union in the 80s. Well, it was even worse in the 1990s because of what they did to the Soviet and Russian state. Even as leftists and anti-capitalists, let's not get it twisted that Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and these US oligarchs the reason they're cutting NATO funding, or they might leave NATO, the reason they're withdrawing from European politics and they want peace with Russia and everything like that, let's not pretend they're people who want to save all this money, bring it back home and invest in America, because America needs drastic investment. It doesn't have loads of basic things most countries have. If you compare its development to even countries like China, which are far poorer, overall it's just a bit of a joke how much more China is building up its infrastructure than a country like America. So you'd think if they can make that argument, even though I disagree with it because I think America owes a debt to the rest of the world where it should be repairing countries it's devastated, you could understand all of this stuff, and you could maybe even agree with it as a left-wing person, being like, we have so many problems back home that we need to solve. But no, that is not what's going to happen. Imperialism will continue. It's just going to be more specific. Like, the US are going to massively back Israel. The US are not leaving the Pacific. They've been there for nearly 200 years. They have such a massive influence in there, and it benefits them, especially with the rise of China. I don't see the US pulling out from Asia at all. But in terms of Europe, yeah, they're just like, Europeans, you don't pay enough, you don't like fund your own defense enough, you rely on us so much, basically get fucked and do it yourself. And it's a double-edged sword where, yes, Europeans will have to spend more on defense spending, but more independence from the US is a good thing for everyone.
What is all this defense spending anyway? China goes around the world trying to build it. Russia, they fought Ukraine, but Ukraine used to be part of Russia. They broke up the Soviet Union. If the Soviet Union never broke up because of the Cold War, there wouldn't need to be any wars. It'd still be the USSR. Like, I don't understand. Why, when I was young, we used to talk about world peace. All the leaders used to say, oh, we want world peace. We want world peace. What is all this defense stuff? Why not have a building budget? Why not have a cooperation budget where you talk to other countries and say, hey, we got this much to do this good stuff. We got this much to do this good stuff. So do some good stuff. Why are we fighting each other? It's insane.
Everyone, and I'm just sad that US citizens are going to have to suffer at the hands of these cuts where, yes, this US oligarchy is completely looting the nation, but I'm not going to pretend I'm like horrified that the US might leave NATO or something like that. Like, I wanted that for years and years, and if it happens under Donald Trump, then so be it. I'm not going to celebrate Donald Trump as a good person. He's not doing it for good reasons. Like many leftists have said, sometimes someone like Donald Trump can be good for the world generally, just because of how different he is to traditional US presidents. And in his first administration, he filled it with Bush-era neocons who did business as usual. Now he's filling it, like I said, with oligarchs and random people. So they're just doing like unhinged crap that hopefully will benefit us all in the long run. And like everyone's memeing about with China, the best thing to do to become the new superpower is do nothing. Just keep your head down and get on that grind set and let the US destroy itself while you keep rising. US scaling back, good. Reasons for Donald Trump doing it, bad. And what Donald Trump's going to do with the extra cash is also bad, because it's not going to the US citizens, it's just going to the pockets of the 1%. That's it for the video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and if you made it this far,
you too, comment.
thank you for watching.
Okay, so that was the Kavernacle, going over Donald Trump and a little bit of world views, pulling out the UN, things like that. So yeah, I agree with most of the things he said. I think that the US on the world stage is kind of an evil state, if not the most evil state in the world. We've done a lot of bad. I would like to do better. I'd like to do a lot of good. We're the most powerful nation right now, losing a lot to China. I would say they're going to be the most powerful nation. Like he said, we took the world's hegemony from Britain. I would say China's going to be the next world's hegemony, unless they are really trying to make a multipolar world. Then if China's the one that's going to take the lead, then we will have more countries with more say and be multipolar. And I would like to be a part of that. The Democratic Party, the Republican Party, they like to fight. They like to war people, capitalism stuff. The Green Party is much different. People-powered party. You're a person. You need to get in it. And you'll know this if you look at stuff from across the spectrum.